A man aged in his 90s dies from coronavirus in Victoria as the state records 216 new cases.
We've indicated consistently that things would most likely get worse before they got better.
Meanwhile, in New South Wales, a man who visited a Sydney pub and tested positive to the virus has given it to 3 members of his household. Also ahead, Australia's medicines regulator gives the green light to the first treatment option for COVID-19. And Turkey turns an iconic Istanbul museum back into a mosque, prompting criticism from religious and political leaders. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Miriam Corowa. Victoria has recorded 1 death and 216 new coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours. Premier Daniel Andrews says a man aged in his 90s has died overnight. Reporter Danny Tran has more from Melbourne.
Well, it's the news that Victorians have been bracing for. Another triple-digit day in the state. 216 new cases of coronavirus, and tragically another man has died overnight, a man in his 90s, taking the death toll to 23 lives lost. There are 186 cases under investigation, 30 linked to known outbreaks and 49 people in hospital. Now, the official advice is that even if you have the mildest of the symptoms, you should go and get tested. And to that end, there have been more than 1 million tests in Victoria. There are 150 testing sites. And the government says the plan is ultimately to have a testing site within 10 k's of people's homes. Now, the Premier also says that in addition to testing, one way Victorians can ensure that the pandemic stops its spread is to wear masks. Of course, we know the advice around that has changed, and Victorians are now being advised to wear masks if they are unable to socially distance when they go out into public. Here's what he had to say.
We've just got to be really clear about this. It's not compulsory, but where you are out for a lawful purpose and you believe you may not be able to maintain that 1.5 metre distance from other people, then through an abundance of caution, and it's a low cost, high reward. No mask is foolproof. No mask will get the risk of infection down to 0, but every little bit helps. Every contribution helps.
Now, when it comes to slowing down the infection rate, the Chief Health Officer said that in the days before the lockdown began, the authorities began seeing a change in behaviour, and they're hoping that within the next 3 to 5 days we'll start seeing results from that, and overall in the long term that will cause the numbers of infections to plateau. Now, the advice for Victorians remains the same. There are only 4 reasons to leave your home: work or study, the provision of supplies, exercise, or for medical reasons. And Victorians are being urged to follow that advice to ensure that we do not end up in another lockdown situation and to ensure that the infections do not spread beyond Greater Melbourne.
In New South Wales, a man who visited a pub in southwest Sydney and tested positive to COVID-19 has given it to 3 members of his household. The state has recorded 7 new cases overnight. Reporter Jessie Dorset is in Casula.
This is the pop-up testing clinic at the Crossroads Hotel at Casula in Sydney's southwest. You can see dozens of people are here doing the right thing, heeding the advice of authorities to get swabbed. Now, the venue has been temporarily shut down and there are about 10 contractors inside doing a deep clean. That's after a woman in her 30s and a man in his 50s both tested positive to COVID-19. Now, they don't know each other, but they were here on the same night, last Friday, a week ago. The people we've spoken to who are waiting to get tested say they're doing it for themselves and their families.
No, I've been here about an hour and a half waiting. But it will happen, just be patient.
This is my local, so I was here on the Friday, so I'm just coming to get verification everything is okay.
Just doing the right thing and ruling out all possibilities.
New South Wales has recorded 7 new infections overnight. One is the man from the Blue Mountains who was here at the Crossroads Hotel a week ago. 3 people who had close contact with him at home have also contracted coronavirus. They're all now self-isolating. Authorities say New South Wales is at a critical point in the fight to contain the virus. More than 1 million swabs have been taken across New South Wales since the pandemic began. But of course, now's not the time to slow down the testing. Extra resources are being sent to places where Victorians likely are. Places like the border communities, Albury-Wodonga, the New South Wales snowfields, Ballina and Byron Bay.
Authorities are stepping in to control the coronavirus outbreak in Victoria and stop it spreading into New South Wales. Ashley Aldridge has more from the Albury Showgrounds on the New South Wales-Victoria border.
Just this morning, a new testing clinic site has been opened here at the Albury Showgrounds. Now, it replaces a smaller clinic which was opened at a community centre earlier this week, which came after New South Wales Health issued an urgent message to locals in the Albury and Wodonga area, urging anyone who is experiencing even the most mildest of symptoms to get tested. Now, since that initial clinic opened on Tuesday, more than 900 people have turned out to be tested, and they're expecting around another 200 people to come here today. We're already seeing a stream of people turn up to be tested. We spoke with the Murrumbidgee Local Health District's disaster manager a short time ago. Here's a little bit of what she had to say.
We're still seeing large numbers. In the last week, we have tested 900 or thereabouts people. So we then worked through the week to identify a new location, and we'll be set up here for the next couple of weeks, operating from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m.
Ashley, there are now 3 positive cases for the Albury region. What have local health authorities had to say?
That's right. Earlier this week, we learnt that 2 people had tested positive to COVID-19. Of those 2 people, we know that one of them had recently travelled to Melbourne before those hotspot restrictions were reintroduced. Now, they are from the same family. We've since learned that a 3rd family member has also tested positive to COVID-19. Now, we haven't had a positive case here for more than 100 days, so local authorities have really sought to reassure the local community that this isn't the case of a new outbreak, rather it is an isolated cluster. They say that it has been contact traced back to Melbourne, and this family has had little contact with the local community.
Now, it's also day 4 of the border closure there. Are there still significant delays for those trying to cross from Victoria into New South Wales?
We haven't seen those chaotic scenes which we did see in the initial few days of those closures. They've made a few changes to those main checkpoints. On the Lincoln Causeway, they have extended it to 2 lanes, which has really helped with that traffic congestion. And out on the Hume Freeway during peak hour times, they're also allowing cars to be checked, which has really significantly reduced that time waiting for people to cross through the border. That 72-hour grace period, which New South Wales Police said that they would give to people trying to cross the border, has now come to an end. So locals looking to cross the state lines from now on are really being urged to have their permits ready to show authorities or risk being turned back into Victoria.
2 Defence Force personnel who recently returned to Queensland from overseas have tested positive to COVID-19. Health authorities say the pair has been in isolation since their arrival and there's no public transmission risk. It brings the state's total to 1,070, with 3 cases now listed as active. It comes as the federal government confirms it will cut more than half the number of flights into the country, with states and territories to begin charging returning travellers for the cost of hotel quarantine. The Therapeutic Goods Administration has approved Australia's first treatment option for coronavirus. Remdesivir has been approved here and is already a treatment in the European Union, Japan and Singapore. Political reporter Anna Henderson has more.
The Therapeutic Goods Administration made this announcement overnight and says that this drug will be available to adults and teenagers who are suffering extreme effects of coronavirus. So people who require ventilation, who are in ICU, they will be able to access this drug. There has been some discussion internationally about supplies of this drug and whether or not the United States has taken up quite a bit of the available supply, and also whether or not this drug is providing working through the clinical trials enough of the evidence required to prove that it is an effective drug to use for coronavirus. But certainly there has been a lot of positive reaction politically. This is Jim Chalmers from the Labor Party, the Shadow Treasurer, and this is his view on this therapeutic goods announcement.
I think it's really important that this drug has been approved for treatment, because treatment will be such an important part of what's necessary here in the absence of a vaccine. We want to make sure that the government has sufficient stocks of this important treatment to deal with what has been a spike in cases in Victoria. Until and unless we have a vaccine for COVID, these kinds of treatments will be extremely important.
Anna, have there been any concerns expressed about its use?
Yes, well, as I mentioned, there have been some discussions internationally about the use of this drug and also whether or not there's enough of a supply. We did hear some interesting comments from the Victorian Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, in relation to this news overnight. This is what he had to say.
The Victorian clinical community will look to remdesivir as a therapeutic option. If it's on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods now, they will love to have it available for them as they have used dexamethasone, that powerful steroid that's been shown to have a genuine effect on mortality rates. So remdesivir is another drug that's shown some effect, possibly not as strong as the simple and cheap dexamethasone steroid drug, but it certainly has a role and seems to reduce the amount of time that people are ill for and require in hospital.
How much of that drug do we actually have in Australia or Victoria? I don't know if you know.
I don't know.
The US was stockpiling it.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that the Australian government has looked to get its own supply, but the US really went very hard in gobbling up the entire global supply almost.
Now, Anna, in a separate matter, the federal government is also facing some heat over its decision to end the free childcare provisions it put in place due to coronavirus. Are parents prepared for the changes?
Well, we've seen some commentary over the past few days about whether or not parents will be able to afford it once this free childcare provision is no longer in place from the coming week, and also whether or not some of those childcare services are going to get into some trouble because they won't be able to afford to pay all of their staff if they have a drop in revenue. So some serious issues for the government to deal with as the next week unfolds. But of course, at the same time, we've heard many times from the Treasurer and the Prime Minister that some of these measures put in place for coronavirus were incredibly expensive to the federal budget and do need to be more tailored. Now, Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers was speaking on this issue as well today, just raising concerns about how this is all going to unfold.
Our concern is by kicking childcare workers off JobKeeper and not making the new arrangements sufficient to deal with that a lot of parents will have to make very difficult choices. The Prime Minister says that we're all in this together. Well, if that is to be more than a slogan, then he needs to recognise that some of the decisions that the government has taken have made life even more difficult for people during this crisis, including working parents who had it tough enough before.
So, Miriam, there have been special provisions put in place in Victoria in areas where the lockdown provisions are continuing. But in terms of the rest of the country, there's still a lot of people who have either lost their jobs or had reduced working hours who now have to find the money to put their children back into childcare. And that's a political issue that no doubt will be raised with the government many times in the coming week.
A truck driver has been charged with 9 offences over a crash on the Hume Highway south of Sydney that claimed the life of an 8-year-old girl. 4 people were taken to Liverpool Hospital after the truck drove into the car park of a rest area at Menangle yesterday afternoon, where it hit another truck and 3 cars. The young girl died at the scene. The 45-year-old truck driver was taken to hospital for mandatory testing. He's due to face Parramatta Bail Court, charged with multiple offences, including dangerous driving and negligent driving occasioning death. Police in Malaysia have confirmed the country's Attorney General is considering laying charges against a group of 6 journalists, including 5 Australians. The journalists produced a documentary for Al Jazeera's 101 East program, which investigated the arrests of undocumented migrant workers during the coronavirus pandemic. Phil Robertson, Deputy Asia Director at Human Rights Watch, says that there is nothing inaccurate about the documentary.
This is about a documentary they did on migrant workers being locked down during the COVID-19 epidemic and then basically being arrested and put in immigration detention centers, ultimately to be deported. And it's a pretty straightforward, well-done documentary, but it has obviously rubbed the Malaysian government the wrong way. So they're facing charges, a couple different criminal charges, which are quite serious. What we're seeing, of course, like everywhere else, is huge dislocation economically. A lot of Malaysian people, like everywhere else, are suffering from shutdowns, loss of jobs, what have you. But unfortunately, because this government is a new government which has not really shown that it has a majority in parliament, it is playing a cynical political game. And part of that is also blaming others, trying to focus anger and distract, almost sort of Trumpian tactics. And in this case, the migrant workers are the favorite for this. And Al Jazeera did an excellent documentary that calls into question the government's narrative about migrant workers. It's good that they're getting assistance from the Australian government, but it looks like they have a pretty good team of lawyers as well. And I think that that is going to be the most important thing. I think it's also important for Al Jazeera and other groups like ours and media freedom groups to campaign for these no charges to be brought. We looked through this documentary. We don't see where it was inaccurate. I mean, I have worked directly on the Malaysian migrant worker issues for years, and Al Jazeera got it all right. And, what's astonishing is that the government is pursuing this. I think a lot of people see this as an effort by the Malaysian government to try to intimidate journalists, to create a culture of fear and try to silence them. And I don't think it will work.
The world-famous Hagia Sophia Museum in Istanbul has been turned back into a mosque. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan signed a decree to enact the change after the Council of State ruled it should never have been converted into a museum. Greece has described the move as an open provocation to the entire civilised world.
Change is coming to Hagia Sophia, jewel of the Byzantine Empire. A great monument to Christianity conquered by the Ottomans, later a museum bearing testimony to layers of history. But President Erdogan, who presents himself as a modern-day conqueror, has announced a new chapter. Anyone who doesn't like it, he says, and plenty abroad don't, is attacking Turkey's sovereignty. Under its soaring golden dome, Hagia Sophia will now become a mosque, as in Ottoman days. But Turkey says Christian emblems, like mosaics of the Virgin Mary, will remain, and everyone will be welcome. Making changes here is profoundly symbolic. It was Kemal Ataturk, founder of modern Turkey, who decreed that Hagia Sophia should be a museum. Now, President Erdogan is taking one more step to dismantle Ataturk's secular legacy and remould Turkey according to his vision. And that's a vision that alarms the Turkish Nobel laureate Orhan Pamuk, who has gazed lovingly at Hagia Sophia from his balcony for the past 25 years.
Turks are proud to be a secular Muslim nation. Now converting St. Sophia into a mosque will take away that pride from the nation. There are millions of secular Turks like me who are crying against this, but their voices are not heard because we don't have enough free speech and democracy in Turkey, unfortunately, anymore.
Back at Hagia Sophia, British tourists visiting today were unconcerned by the change.
That's just part of the history of Turkey, and it's up to the Turkish government, I think. I'd visit it whether it's a mosque or a museum. It doesn't bother me.
And you think it's for the Turks to decide?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
reclaiming Hagia Sophia plays well with the Turkish leader's base and distracts from the economic damage done by COVID-19. But many in the international community say it belongs to humanity and should have been left unchanged.
Returning home, surfers have held an emotional ocean tribute to Winter Olympian Alex Pullin, who died on Wednesday on the Gold Coast. Family and friends gathered at Palm Beach this morning to take part in a paddle-out ceremony in honour of the popular athlete. The 32-year-old was unable to be revived after being pulled unconscious from the same beach on Wednesday. He'd been spearfishing alone and may have suffered a shallow water blackout. Another memorial will be held at North Narrabeen in Sydney tomorrow. Now time for sport with Jared Coote.
A Dane Gagai hat-trick helped South Sydney to an 18-10 victory over the West Tigers. Gagai scored the first 2 tries of the match as the Rabbitohs raced out to a 10-0 half-time lead. South Sydney continued their dominance and were up 4 tries to 0 until the Tigers mounted a late comeback, but it just wasn't enough in the end. Latrell Mitchell and Josh Reynolds are facing 2 weeks on the sideline following an early altercation. Earlier on, the Gold Coast Titans ended a 10-game losing streak at home by beating the New Zealand Warriors 16-12. The Titans were behind by 10 early, but fought back to score the winner in the 74th minute.
Yeah, well, that's the, we all want to see that from James. That's not too many players in the game can score that try. That's what makes him special, but hopefully he can get some football behind him now and we can see a lot more special tries from him. Just our effort. We come off a 5-day tough game last week. The guys all turned up again tonight and put a lot of effort into that game. We were in control of it for most of it, but the last 10 or 15 minutes they certainly tested us.
Collingwood have moved inside the top 4 on the competition ladder. The Pies bounced back from 2 straight losses to defeat Hawthorn 59-27. The Pies kicked 5 of the first 6 goals and never looked like losing the match, which was played in Sydney. The Hawks' 27-point effort was their lowest total since Alistair Clarkson took charge of the club 16 seasons ago. Adam Treloar was brilliant for Collingwood with 35 disposals, while Brody Myercheck kicked 4 goals. In a further blow for the Hawks, Jonathan Patton left the field with a hamstring injury.
We are realistic about where we sit as a footy club. We've played 5 of the best 6 teams in last year's season, and we're 3-3. We'd like to be better than that, but 3-3 still has us alive in the season. We had a particularly tough last 10 days in terms of what we've had to do as a footy club. Get out of the state, our whole club, in the space of 2 days, play a game in Sydney against an opponent that's just sitting here waiting for you.
Super Rugby Australia had its first Golden Point game overnight. The Melbourne Rebels and Queensland Reds played out a tense 18-all draw. The Rebels looked like they would escape with all the points until Alex Murphy crossed at the death for the Reds. James O'Connor kicked the conversion to send the match to extra time, a concept introduced this year for the first time. Bryce Hegarty had a chance to win the game for the Reds with a penalty goal in the extra period, but couldn't hit the mark. Australian Dan Ricciardo was involved in a crash during practice at the Styrian Grand Prix. Ricciardo escaped uninjured after coming off the track during the second practice session in Austria. Ricciardo limped away from the incident but was cleared to continue racing by doctors. The Aussie says he went into the turn too quick and has a bruised knee. Max Verstappen was fastest in the second practice session, followed by Valtteri Bottas. Defending world champion Lewis Hamilton was 6th fastest.
Checking the satellite image, a low cold front crossing South Australia, Western New South Wales and Victoria is generating showers and storms, while a trough over southern Queensland, New South Wales and Tasmania is triggering showers. Onshore winds are bringing light rain to eastern Queensland and the Northern Territory. Looking around the country for today, bright skies in Queensland, cool to mild across the state. A cool day in New South Wales and the ACT with snow on the Alps and clearing showers in the south. Stay warm and dry indoors in Victoria with storms in the east and showers increasing for a cold day. Turning to Tasmania, and morning fog will clear for sunny skies in the southeast. Rain falls elsewhere. Showers across South Australia, very cold temperatures across the state. A different story in Western Australia with a warm sunny day forecast. And the top end will be very warm, cool to cold over the south of the NT. Now to tomorrow's forecast for the capital cities. Late showers in Brisbane and Canberra. Rainfall increasing across Sydney. Rain also on the way for Melbourne. Hobart and Adelaide, possible showers. Perth, a sunny day. And a top of 33 for Darwin. That is the latest from ABC News. Remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on iView. I'm Miriam Corowa. Stay with us. Australian Story is coming up next.